So it's 7:05 and we're going to get started. So I'd like to first start off by saying welcome to the Racial Justice Mayoral Candidate Forum. This forum is being hosted by three racial justice groups in Melrose. The first one being Fighting for Black Lives in Our Neighborhood, the Melrose Racial Justice Community Coalition, and the Friends of Melrose METCO. I'm your moderator tonight, Ayanna Spencer Lakes, and I want to say thank you for allowing me to do this evening. It's very exciting. A little bit about myself. I'm a board member of the Friends of METCO Melrose, METCO liaison to the Melrose Special Education Parents Advisory Council, also known as CPAC, METCO DEI liaison, and former DEI representative for the Lincoln School PTO. And that's all I'm going to say about myself, because we're going to just jump right in. We are honored to have all three mayoral candidates tonight with us. And just a few notes for the event. The questions we are asking at this event were crowdsourced from the community. If you do have any additional questions for the candidates, we hope you will ask those questions before you vote in the preliminary mayoral election on Tuesday, September 19th, 2023. The speaker order was randomly selected, and we will rotate the speaking order. To support equity, our timekeeper will mute candidates if they exceed their allotted speaking time. A recording of this event will be posted at www.melroseracialjusticeforum.org. And now I'd like to invite each of the candidates to take 2 minutes to introduce themselves. Ms. Grigoritis will go first, followed by Ms. Hammer, and next we'll have Ms. Madero Solano.
Thank you to the organizers of tonight's event and to everyone in attendance. I think it's a testament to our community that we have so many residents engaged on this issue and logged in here tonight. And I do just want to take a moment to say that I'm honored to be here with my fellow candidates. I know we're sharing in this unique experience, and I hope that you both and your families are well as we go through this together. By way of introduction, I am Jen Grigoritis. I want to start out by saying that as a white, Jewish, cis, straight woman, I come to tonight's conversation with a great amount of privilege, and I strive to be aware of this as I lean into issues of racial injustice. I believe it is my responsibility to use my privilege to listen to and to elevate the articulated needs of people of color and those of marginalized identities. I believe it is my responsibility to speak up and out when I observe discrimination, and to follow the lead of those impacted on how to best support them, and to do this work even when it is not easy and it is not comfortable. I am running for office because I believe that government can and should be good in the lives of people, especially those with a career in public service, with a focus on supporting communities and individuals impacted who are disproportionately people of color, women, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. I believe that we provide better services at every level of government, everyone, when we do the work to ensure that all voices are part of the conversation. I believe I combine a demonstrated passion and commitment for working on behalf of with the executive experience to lead and deliver results. In the 2 decades I have spent working in state government, I have administered an annual budget of $60 million, including providing funding to 140 programs across the Commonwealth to ensure high quality, equitable, and free services to approximately 90,000 victims of crime. I not only know how to move money from point A to point B, but how to collaboratively use finite resources in order to make the biggest impact in people's lives, where they live and work and go to school, and make sure that we are addressing inequities that we know exist in our community so that we can continue to work toward change. Thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you so much for that, that introduction. And next, we will have Ms. Hammer.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and thank you to the organizers for tonight and for all of the work that you do for all of us in Melrose. I have learned a great deal from these three organizations, from you all, and I find it incredible that Melrose has at least 3 groups that advocate for racial justice in our community. And the fact that we have at least 3 groups that advocate for racial justice means we have a lot of work to do. I believe in the power and potential of good government. As someone with 20 years of experience working in state and local government, I have seen firsthand the impact of great policy and bold leadership. I started as a Boston Public High School teacher, and that's when I learned that students need to see themselves in their teachers and leaders, that we need to rebuild our very fractured relationship with our educators here in Melrose, and that we need to start working with caregivers as partners. I've worked in business development in Boston, and that's how I know how to help small businesses already here and how to recruit businesses that we want and need. I worked to deploy a $1 billion bond to improve services at the state and local level, and built and managed a team to create innovative technology design around and for the people most impacted by our services. And I've worked at the Treasury on economic empowerment, and that's how I know we can support our working families by scaling services we already have, and how to help people build equity through housing and economic development opportunities. I believe we need to engage a community in its own progress for our shared future. And I pledge to be a mayor who listens intently, welcomes the difficult, critical conversations needed to ensure the safety, health, and dignity of every Melrosian. I will keep my door open and hold myself accountable to the people in progress, and bring differing perspectives around the decision-making table for real progress. So my name is Sam Hammer, and I'm running to be your next mayor because this is my life's work and this is my home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hammer. And last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Mayoral Solano.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Fighting for Black Lives in Our Neighborhood, the Racial Justice Community Coalition, and the Friends of Melrose METCO for hosting this forum, my fellow candidates for participating, and the voters for watching. My name is Monica Madeiro Solano. I'm a candidate for mayor of Melrose. I've lived here in Melrose my whole life. I'm the daughter of a first-generation American whose first language was not English. My parents struggled and saved to buy this house on the edge of town where I continue to live today. I've been privileged to grow up in a stable and loving environment with two parents who sacrificed so much for me to have the opportunities that I have today, including being here today as a candidate for mayor. I've gotten involved at the local level, serving on the school committee and then the city council for a total of 14 years altogether. And I'm running for mayor today because I'm grateful for those opportunities, and I want to ensure that the next generations have these same opportunities and more. Tonight, we're going to address important and sometimes sensitive topics. I'm hopeful that this will be the beginning of the discussion. And if I'm elected mayor, I'm committed to keeping this conversation going and to improving relations among all of us in our community. Thanks so much, and I'm looking forward to keeping this conversation going.
Thank you all so much for your wonderful introductions and for staying within time. Now we're going to go into our questions that were crowdsourced. So in 2022, the City of Melrose engaged in a diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment process designed to collect information about racial climate in Melrose. According to the DEI assessment, 35% of Black people feel uncomfortable interacting with City Hall compared to only 6% of white people. The question is, what would you do to make City Hall more welcoming to Black people? And first, we will have Ms. Hammer.
Great, thank you. So when you step into someone's home, you get a sense of who lives there. It's most obvious by the art or the photos on the walls. And from that, you get a sense of whether you are comfortable, welcomed, or you belong. City Hall is the people's home. And so I want to open it up. I want everyone to feel welcomed and a sense of ownership and pride when walking into our home. I want to open up our space for community meetings that are more informal, for other groups to come in, and for more public interaction and learning together. And I want to bring City Hall out to the people, offer services that we have where people actually are. And so again, the City Hall is the people's building, and that's how I see it. I have heard too often that our City Hall, especially our council chamber, doesn't feel as welcoming and warm. I want to be able to honor our history while creating some belonging spaces and welcoming warm spaces for residents in Melrose today. I want to put public art and impact the building on the walls and in our halls so that Melrosians can physically see themselves inside City Hall, solicit proposals from artists of color, and to exhibit with a reception to invite everybody to come in for a discussion. And also, very importantly, government works best when it is representative of the people we serve. We need to invest real time and real money in hiring people of color and take a proactive outreach approach to really find folks that we need to represent us inside City Hall. Again, City Hall is our building, it's our home, and it also has a beautiful front lawn. So let's all come out and use it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, Ms. Madero Solano.
Thank you. You know, government in general, even here in Melrose, has not always done a very good job of making people of color feel welcome or feel like they'll get the same respect and service as other people. We need to acknowledge that history and reality openly. Then we can look to find ways to make City Hall more open and welcoming. To me, that means creating a customer service oriented atmosphere. That means adding wayfinding assistance such as signage. And I think adding a greeter is a great step and something that I advocated for 4 years ago in the mayor's race. I'm glad to see that Mayor Broder has put this into practice. And we have to make sure that, you know, all of our employees remember that first and foremost, we're customer service, we are public servants. And our goal must be that everyone interacting with City Hall feels welcome and that their concerns and issues are taken seriously and will receive the same priority. That attitude needs to start with the mayor, and as mayor, I will do that. Another focus is increasing workforce diversification so that people of color can see more people who look like them when they interact with city government. My experience on the Labor and Personnel Relations Policy Committee of the Mass Municipal Association and in working in municipal resources in the town of Norwood would be an asset in this area. On the hiring front, we should be doing things like removing names and even addresses from resumes so that we're looking more clearly at a candidate's experience and removing inherent bias from the hiring process. In general, we need to go out and into communities of color to recruit people to choose careers in municipal government. We also need to look at creating more stepping stone positions that will allow people to get their foot in the door. For example, hiring more EMTs could get them on the job training, and later they can become higher paid, full-fledged paramedics. This could help some of our overall staffing issues across the board. And if we encourage people in communities of color to apply for these positions, for example, student teachers or paraprofessionals, they may then have the opportunity to further their education while earning money and diversifying our workforce and providing much needed racial mirroring in our community. Creating an open government in which people feel welcomed and encouraged to participate is one of my top priorities. And as mayor, I'll be focused on creating a more welcoming environment at City Hall.
Thank you so much. And now we will hear from Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you. I just want to first acknowledge that the data that was presented as part of this question is concerning. And also to say that's what is even more concerning to me is that each of these data points represents the lived experience of a resident in our community. And I want to first validate that these encounters happened and commit to doing the work to make positive change. As City Council President in 2020, I partnered with two of my fellow councilors who were the only two counselors of marginalized identities serving with me to develop the City Council's first ever anti-racism statement, which was adopted by all 11 counselors unanimously. Based on my professional experience leading a team, I know that we need to build a City Hall staff that reflects the community it serves. But to get to that end goal and have it be successful, we need to do the foundational work across all city departments and staff levels. This includes trainings on implicit bias and how it impacts our delivery of services, a wide array of stakeholders with the voices of residents of color at the center in developing and executing a DEI strategic plan, engaging staff in setting individual and department DEI goals, a comprehensive review of all City Hall policies and procedures, both internal and external, through an equity framework. We need to not only do this foundational work, but we need to be constantly accountable and reflective to our community on the challenges encountered and the progress made. To bring about change, we need to have good intentions as well as accountability and follow through. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all those wonderful answers. Moving on to the next question. In the Melrose public school system, Black students are suspended at higher rates than white students. Melrose has one of the highest rates of racial disparity in school discipline compared with 12 neighboring communities. In your role as mayor, which also gives you a seat on the school committee, how do you plan to eliminate racial inequities in school discipline? We're going to start with Ms. Madero Solano.
Thank you. Now, this is one of tonight's topics of discussion, which I find the most troubling. Discipline should be fair, and all students should be treated equally. We should not have a discipline system with differing behavior standards or differing punishments for the same conduct. There may be, however, some underlying issues here and strategies that will help these troubling statistics. The school needs to acknowledge the background of the students involved in disciplinary issues and take a trauma-informed approach to how they deal with behavioral issues in the schools and the punishments imposed. We also need to make sure that the parents of Black students have the same access and opportunities to interact regularly with teachers and administrators in their schools, because over time, having or not having these relationships can affect student disciplinary outcomes. It's unfortunate, but people are human, and that's a fact. That's why we need to work to improve it. We need to recognize that Black students face microaggressions often on a daily basis in our society and often in school. And this atmosphere can and does affect the reactions to issues differently. We also need to make sure that any discipline imposed for any of it, we have a robust appeal process for students and parents in which all parties are informed of their rights, especially when it comes to suspensions, which could have a lasting effect on the student record and one's ability to access or be accepted into higher educational opportunities. We also must regularly review discipline statistics, both internally and with an outside review, to make sure that we're continuing to monitor and address any disparities in punishment. As mayor and as a member of the school committee, if elected, I'll work towards eliminating these racial inequities in school discipline.
Thank you. Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you for this question. I think one of the most important responsibilities of the mayor is serving on the school committee. And this matters to me as a parent of an incoming 9th grade, 4th grader, as a former board member of the Melrose Ed Foundation, as one of the founding members of the One Melrose Override campaign, as the daughter of a public schools educator, and as myself a graduate of a public school system. This is a very serious issue, and I know that Melrose Public Schools and the school committee have recently taken some steps to address this, including making changes to secondary school protocols around discipline and restorative justice and deploying a new reporting form for bullying. I am pleased that our leadership teams at the middle school and high school are taking this issue seriously and engaging and taking action, and yet we need to go farther. We need to elevate the voices of students of color, hearing their concerns and working to address them in a trauma-informed way, while also shifting policy in response to their experiences. Their voices are central to how we move forward to see where we can continue to understand and improve. Again, having worked with victims and survivors of violence for 15 years, I know that we need to do both. We need to analyze data and also into the individual stories that are behind that data. We need to acknowledge harm. We need to validate lived experiences and the repercussions of systemic discrimination. We need to be comfortable with the fact that there is not one definition of justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hammer.
Great, thank you. So I come to this question as a former Boston Public High School teacher, living the experience in the classroom, as well as a parent of 2 students at the Lincoln going into middle school next year. And I've seen that inequality shows up in many different ways, more than just discipline, like investment in our students and our schools and access to the services and resources that they need. But on discipline, if a policy like detention or discipline is producing inequity by populations being overrepresented by the data, then you know that there is something wrong with that ecosystem. We are not serving that population equitably. Something is broken. We need some new professional development standards and new systems that counteract these biases that impact Black and brown male students disproportionately. I have said at some of our meetings together and in other meetings of marginalized communities, we can no longer rely on those who are harmed to push us forward in policy. We have to be proactive. Equity in education can only be achieved through equitable resources first. If students are underserved in schools, they are more likely to experience educational disparities, disproportionate discipline, and diminished outcomes that can perpetuate cycles of inequality throughout the rest of their lives. We have to come together to address this, and the responsibility is on us as leaders, as administrators, and school committee members, and we need to work in partnership with our educators and caregivers to develop a system where those students can learn and thrive. And as your mayor, I will remain accessible to people who are in need of support and help so that we can finally detangle our structural our structural deficit and how we actually are able to address our students in need. So thank you.
Thank you again. The next question that we have for the candidates. In the Housing Production Plans Fall 2020 online open house, the most highly endorsed priority was racial and ethnic integration in housing, supported by 65% of participants. However, Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data show that over the past 15 years, only 1% of all home purchase mortgages issued for Melrose were for Black home buyers. Moreover, Black home buyers were 68% more likely than white home buyers to have their mortgage application denied. The question is, what can be done to increase the number of Black homeowners in Melrose? We're going to start with Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you. I think it's well known that Melrose and the entire greater Boston region is facing a housing crisis, both a lack of inventory and affordability. And this is a hugely pressing issue. And this applies to the lack of homeownership opportunities for people of color in this community and throughout greater Boston. This has been a priority of mine to address while I've been in elected office in Melrose. In 2020, I co-sponsored the order to create Melrose's Affordable Housing, which is a dedicated fund for the receipt of payments from developers and other sources so that we can use this money to create a variety of affordable housing options, including low interest loan programs for first-time home buyers, housing assistance for renters, and even the possibility of creating city-owned units for sale or for rent based on certain income requirements. I supported the passage of this housing production plan, which outlines best practices for housing production and brings Melrose in line with the state requirements under Chapter 40B. The recent MBTA Communities Act legislation that was adopted by the state will continue to push us in the entire region to develop housing along the rail corridor, and I have supported zoning amendments that put us in line with legislation. I also want to acknowledge that moving the needle on Black homeownership takes both institutional change and outside advocacy. And I'm grateful that members of our faith community have been engaged with the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization's Housing Justice campaign. I will continue to be committed to supporting housing as a racial justice issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Hammer.
Great, thank you. As I answered this question, I just want to be mindful that this answer, with my answer, I'm not conflating, or we're not conflating race and class. But in speaking of home ownership and our Black neighbors, obviously we need a more diverse housing stock generally. But I would like to propose a new affordable housing strategy where we work with developers. First, we present a vision to them of what we want our city to look like and their city to be. And then we ask them to bring to us proposals that make sense and that look and meld with the the neighborhood that they're in. And instead of asking them to build affordable units, 15% of their stock, their units be affordable, because as we have learned, these are not actually affordable units based on a national formula. I want them to instead invest in our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which we have, to then work with our Affordable Housing Corporation, which we also have, to build units for people, for home ownership opportunities. And those units can be in places that are on transportation-oriented development areas, the MBTA districts, and also we have a lot of opportunity above our first floor retail throughout our business districts. So we can definitely do more affordable housing in ways that we want, in ways that people want it back, and in ways that they can afford it. And one other story I wanted to share was Melrose really being a more welcoming community. So recently we had a very public open event where people at the beer garden finally felt that they belonged. This was the community that they belong in. We need to be a more welcoming, open community for all people to come in. So thank you. I'll talk more about housing as the questions go on.
Thank you. Ms. Madera Solano.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, housing affordability has been affecting all of us here in Melrose and in the greater Boston area in recent years. But we have to acknowledge that housing discrimination and redlining happened and may still even be going on in our own community. And when we think about how we might remedy this inequity, we might consider a few things. So first, we can understand that access to inherited wealth and financial resources may be less for people of color. And we can look towards creating a down payment assistance program or microloan programs to help first-time home buyers who have less resources to put together enough money to make a solid down payment. We can also work with the Melrose Housing Authority to create more affordable housing units in Melrose. And one option to explore is creating incentives for current Melrose homeowners to agree to adding an affordable deed restriction in lieu of paying property taxes so that we could increase our affordable units and also provide property tax relief to homeowners in Melrose, particularly senior citizens that need it. And by doing this, we could create more affordable housing without building more condos or large developments, and having more affordable housing units in Melrose means more access to home ownership to all home buyers, especially those of color. Across the board, whether it be new rentals or in home purchasing or lending, we really need to send a clear message that discrimination and redlining in housing in Melrose is not going to be tolerated. And I'm committed to doing that as the next mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again. So our next question. In the 2023 school year, as in years past, Melrose had no Black teachers. This is a loss for all students and is especially harmful for our Black students. Research shows that when Black students have Black teachers, they are more likely to thrive academically and less likely to be suspended. In your role as mayor, which also gives you a seat on the school committee, what ideas do you have about recruiting and retaining Black teachers? And I know this isn't on the slide, but I just want to make a note here that we're talking about more than a gym teacher. So let you guys ponder on that. And we're going to start with Ms. Hammer.
Great, thank you. So after the last 4 years, especially this last year, we first have to do a lot of work here to rebuild trust and mend our fractured relationship with our educators. Other teachers that we're hoping to recruit are going to look at our recent history and wonder why they should work here at all. We really do need to be proactive in asking folks to come and be a part of our community and work with us. And that, again, we need to make for a welcoming and supportive environment. And then, as I mentioned about economic opportunity and housing, we really can offer if we build units on our own, we really can offer these to folks that we either have currently as public servants and educators, or those that we want to recruit to buy into our community, not only for their employment, but also for their housing and to start building some equity. So we need to invest in our educators of color. It is not enough to say that we're one community open to all. The build it and they will come approach often does not actually signal to diverse educators that they are welcome. It takes a much more proactive approach, and this is multifaceted, but one strategy is to build relationships with local colleges and universities that enroll diverse students. Making Melrose a place where diverse undergrad and grad students studying education come to do student teaching is a way to introduce more educators of color to our community, learn from their perspectives and experiences, and potentially offer them teaching positions when they complete their degrees. For professional development, Melrose Public Schools has been providing professional development as an ongoing basis to address issues of equity and inclusion for the last 10 years. I want to see what those are. I want to make sure that some of those are required for all teachers and modernize them as they probably need to be. And then it's important to retain faculty of color once they're here, particularly in a district where they will be underrepresented. Let's build communities of practice, mentoring, and opportunities for community building and professional development. We have to invest in educators of color if we want them to be invested in us.
Thank you. Ms. Madero Solano?
Thank you. We need to start recruiting teachers more widely in communities of color. And right now, our teacher jobs are probably not publicized widely enough in those communities, and we can definitely do better in our recruitment to make these opportunities more well-known and promoted at colleges with diverse student teachers looking for jobs. You know, we can, as I mentioned earlier, work to create a student teaching path here in Melrose to full-time teacher positions. And this would allow us to recruit student teachers of color from all over the country. In addition, we need to make sure that Black teachers are welcomed in our schools and feel welcomed in the community. We also need to make sure that all Black teachers who are recruited feel included and empowered in their local schools, and who are supported and promoted fairly so that they'll want to stay in the Melrose school system. We need to expand our job postings beyond our usual outreach into communities of color and hope in finding qualified Black principals and administrators, which could also help us to recruit more teachers and staff members of color.
Thank you. Ms. Grigoritis?
Thank you. As I know everyone who's tuning into this is aware, this is an here in Melrose and also in communities across the state. I think one of the things that we're going to need to do is look to our state partners to help us address this in a more holistic way. As mayor, I would continue to advocate for passage of the Educator Diversity Act at the state level, which was sponsored by Senator Lewis and co-sponsored by Rep. Lippert-Garabedian. So we know that our state delegation is aware of the needs and is ready to leverage state resources to help us address the barriers that exist for teachers of color looking to enter the profession and to stay in it. Here in Melrose, we need to empower our school leaders to develop a plan for hiring and retention of teachers of color in Melrose. And we also need to make this an identified, clear priority as we search for our next superintendent. We need to partner with parents of color and students of color to hear their needs and concerns, and we need to ensure that the union is engaged in these conversations. And lastly, we need to do foundational work to make sure that the district has the tools and resources it needs to be successful. The Melrose Public Schools contains the largest number of city employees and yet has no dedicated HR. We need to lay the groundwork, make sure that the tools and resources are there so that we can effectively recruit, retain, and support teachers throughout their lifespan and feel the district has done the work to make this a welcoming place. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next question that we have for the candidates. In the city's 2 weeks toward change report from July 2020, the Office of Planning and Community Development recommended that Melrose create an addendum to the Melrose Forward Master Plan, to specifically make a goal of addressing inequity and discrimination in listing the housing, transportation, economic development, open space, and infrastructure changes that should be made to achieve changes that should be made to achieve this goal. What would you work to have this addendum added to the master plan? That I butchered that question, but you all had it beforehand, so you know what I mean. And first, we will start with Ms. Mayoral Solano.
Thank you. Yes, discrimination is wrong and against the law. And I believe that inequality and discrimination are concerns here in Melrose, and we should do whatever we can to eradicate them. So integrating these goals into our master planning process makes sense, and I think can help make a difference. It's about setting the tone at the top and including it throughout all of our community. I especially feel strongly about the importance of protecting and enhancing all of our green spaces in all of our neighborhoods. And that as a city, I think we can do a lot more to enhance our many small business districts across the city so that public amenities like streets and sidewalks, lampposts, all of that are consistent across the city. So as our next mayor, I'm committed to leaving no neighborhood behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you. So to answer the question, yes, I would work to have this added to the master plan. Creating master plans and strategic plans is something in which I have significant experience. One of my roles as the chief of staff at the Massachusetts office was in overseeing the implementation as a specific set of DEI goals at the agency, team, and individual level. This process, when we add this in, needs to include stakeholder engagement and constituent focus groups to be conducted in accessible, culturally reflective, and trauma-informed formats. We need to have city staff participating in goal setting at the agency, team, and individual level. And we need to be regularly reviewing the plan with internal and external partners for feedback and providing updates on successes and challenges to the public. To me, the follow through is as important as the plan. We need to be tracking progress, measuring results, being honest, transparent, and reflective on where we have had success and where we've come up short, and we need to be regularly reporting in an accessible and equitable way back to the community.
Thank you. And Ms. Hammer?
Sure. Back to the addendum added to the master plan. Absolutely, yes. Our systems are designed for inequality, and the status quo is designed to perpetuate it. So as your mayor, I would commit to community engagement on this addendum to call out where inequalities in our system are, bring people to the table who are most impacted, and have hard conversations about how to unwind the system to finally make some progress. The work we will do to advance equity will look different for everyone, and we understand that achieving equity is an ongoing and collective effort. But by working together, we can continue to commit Melrose's principle of one community open to all as a community that values and is strengthened by its diversity and ensures that everyone has the opportunity to thrive and contribute meaningfully to our shared future. As your mayor, I will be responsible and accountable for integrating an equity framework throughout city government as well as its outcomes. And in my equity agenda, which you can now find on samformelrose.com/equity, we will make equity advancement a part of every policy and service design in every department. It's time we said the hard things and then also did the hard work and openly. I look forward to working with the community, including most of you on this call, on advancing this addendum forward.
Thank you. And I like the plug. And the next question that we're gonna be asking, in 2022, the city of Melrose engaged in a diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI assessment process designed to collect information about the racial climate in Melrose. Although the survey revealed racial inequities across numerous measures, the report back to the community did not include a discussion of these findings, and there are seemingly no plans to address racial inequities in Melrose. The question, as mayor, what steps would you take to understand and eliminate racial inequities in our city or in your city? We're gonna start with Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you. I think the first step that any leader needs to do here is acknowledge that these inequities exist in our city and continue to exist. As I've said before, understanding comes from listening to and validating the voices and lived experiences of our residents of color. And we need to do this in ways that are safe, trauma-informed, culturally reflective, and accessible. We need to analyze data and trends, as well as listen to understand from individual experiences. We need to be always looking around every table where decisions are being made and noticing who isn't there, and not just including them, but elevating the voices of those that have been sidelined. And we need to make our own structural changes within City Hall and in how we do business, how we procure goods and services, how we retain, train, and support staff, how we expand and protect access to government meetings and information, regardless of physical or language limitations. I have demonstrated my commitment to these issues during my 4 years on the council, and as mayor would continue to do the hard things in order to make city government truly accessible.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Hammer.
Thank you. So the question was, what steps would I take to understand and eliminate racial inequities in our city? So I've learned quite a bit from all of you and these three groups over the years. Racial inequity impacts men and women differently, non-binary differently, and age differently as well. Racial inequity affects every part of life: education, housing, economic, every part. And it's time we actually do the work. We acknowledge the historical and ongoing disparities faced by individuals from different racial backgrounds and are dedicated to dismantling systemic barriers and ensuring that every resident, regardless of their racial identity, has full and equal access to opportunities, resources, and representation in the decision-making process. So I first want to partner with the community to create an equity task force of department heads and community members, including youth commissioners and experts, with open meetings for the public to attend and also learn from, who would review the agenda, drive the agenda, and keep us all accountable. Second thing I want to do is all of this work needs to be driven by data, quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative data will clearly show us where our society and our system are broken. We need to work with an expert partner or organization so that we know upfront what our best practices are and how we can move our community forward without having to learn as we're going and doing it. The fourth thing is ongoing communications. By promoting open and inclusive dialogue, cities can build trust, foster understanding of the challenges faced by marginalized communities, and encourage public participation to address these systemic inequities and promote social justice. And the fifth is to track progress, ensuring accountability and transparency in the pursuit of equitable outcomes for all residents. We need to discuss where we are and where we want to be, have educational programmings for the community also to learn and engage, and actually produce some of those efficacy reports publicly. So those are the steps to understand where we are. The draft plan is in the agenda that I mentioned and is in the work that we do. But a few things I want to just point out here, if I still have some time, is I want to create the Office of Economic Opportunity. Bringing departments together and these functions together would focus and exponentially expand our efficacy in this work, including business development, housing, affordable housing and housing affordability, development and community benefit, and capital investment. Also, there are stanfordmelrose.com/equity. There is a plan of steps we will actually take for education, housing, public works and infrastructure, public health and safety. But the other one I want to mention tonight is around democracy and elections. I think it's really important, again, that government best represents itself by the people. Government works best when we are representative of the people that we serve. I want to have public information sessions on civic engagement, including how to participate on boards and commissions, and also how to run for elected office. The only way we're going to get, okay, cool. Scene. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Madero Solano.
Thank you. So one of the tenets of my campaign is making sure that we have an open and transparent government. And I think we need to do a better job across the board of evaluating the effectiveness of our initiatives and our expenditures and communicating them to the public. Now, the city did put out a request for proposals for equity assessment and DEI training earlier this year. As mayor, I'm going to work to make sure that plans just don't sit on a shelf. As this process moves forward, I will be reviewing the results to implement the recommended changes. Treating people with respect, listening to them, and treating them fairly and equally must always be at the forefront. And as we look forward to drafting any new legislation or policies, I'll be reviewing them to make sure that they're not creating or worsening any disparate impacts that are out there. I also just want to mention in terms of plans, proposals, and that have come out, the 2 weeks towards change report that was done in 2020. It had so many ideas, and often, I'm not sure how well that's been implemented, but often it was said that funding was an issue that was stopping some of the improvements that were suggested by our own staff members from being implemented. That's why, to me, one of the most important things that I can do as mayor and that we need to do as a city is to make sure that we are really engaging in long-term planning and that we get our finances under control. As mayor, I'll begin on day one to build a 5-year strategic financial plan. This will help us to go back and review what we've spent our money on for the last, say, 3 to 5 years, and find ways moving forward we can project out what we need versus what we have for revenues coming in, and then look back and see, are there ways that we can be more effective, and can we restructure, can we partner with other communities to regionalize, etc., so that we can find ways to reduce our budget shortfall. I'm very concerned about using our free cash to balance our budget on an ongoing basis. This is an unsustainable way to do business. And it also means that it takes that money, that free cash, one-time revenue that we often use for these one-time projects, like implementing a new plan or making some changes that involve capital or and other things. Our city departments are all important, and they all face the public and provide services. So I'm implementing that kind of strategic financial planning is vital to our success in many areas, including eliminating some of our racial disparities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those answers. Our next question . In the city's 2 weeks tour change report from July 2020, the Office of Planning and Community Development recommended that past discriminatory redlining practices should be acknowledged. Redlining was a network of federal, state, and city regulations and practices that prevented Black people from buying homes in Melrose prior to 1968. The effects of redlining on Melrose persist today. How should the city acknowledge past discriminatory redlining practices? And we will start with Ms. Hammer.
Great, thank you. So one of the 2 weeks to change memos that I came upon recently was from our historical commission. And they talk about having accurate history lessons for everyone. And I agree. We'll talk more about this later when we talk about that topic. But similar to the work that they have done in Black History Month, and we need to have more educating around for our entire community around the history on zoning and how it relates to decisions that are made today. So paraphrasing from the Historical Commission's memo, they've offered to continue to work to educate the public about the history of people of color and other marginalized groups in Melrose's past. Through publications, public presentations, the Melrose Historical Commission will continue to research and bring these otherwise forgotten stories and people to the forefront of our community's attention. So while preliminary conversations with the Melrose School Committee Chair indicated an interest in developing some of this local history with the commission, the possibility should be explored to further include the history of people of color and other marginalized groups in Melrose, and anything that we do for our students, anything that they're learning, the rest of us in the public need access to as well. We all have gaps in our in our history lessons from multiple generations. So as we learn together as a community, we will grow together as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Medeiros Solano.
Thank you. Yes, we need to acknowledge this reality and move forward with a comprehensive plan to help people of color purchase homes in Melrose. Redlining is wrong, it's illegal, and it will not be tolerated. The message needs to be reinforced and communicated clearly within our financial community. One of the best ways to acknowledge such practices is to create ways to increase home ownership opportunities for Black people to the extent that is possible. So as discussed earlier, we can look at possibly creating more down payment assistance programs or microloan programs, both publicly and or privately for low income or first time home buyers, and increasing the number of affordable units in Melrose could help all people of colors, and they're areas that I'm committed to exploring as mayor. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you. Just absolutely, the impacts of redlining need to be publicly acknowledged and be a part of the framework as we continue to move to developing future housing policy for the city. Again, through my work with victims and survivors of violence, I know that we need to that those that have been directly harmed must be centered and acknowledged in any acknowledgement as we work to move forward. I have learned that we need to acknowledge that harm. We need to validate lived experiences. We need to validate the repercussions of systemic discrimination. We need to feel comfortable with the fact that there is not one day of justice, and we need to look to those that are harmed to help us provide them with what they feel is justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Our next question that we're going to ask. In the Housing Production Plan's Spring 2021 online open house, 50% of participants indicated that passing the Community Preservation Act was a high priority. If used as intended, the Community Preservation Act would provide dedicated funding for affordable housing. What are your plans for affordable housing, and do you believe the Community Preservation Act is a high priority? I nailed that question, guys. Ms. Medeiros Solano.
Thank you. Well, I feel there are other ways to address affordable housing without raising taxes that can be equally effective. For instance, we can, again, create a program to allow senior citizens or others who can't pay their property taxes and water bills, but who want to remain in their homes, the opportunity to not pay those taxes and bills in exchange for adding affordable housing deed restrictions on their properties. And such a program would create a viable way to help both senior citizens and home buyers of color to purchase affordable homes in Melrose, and would help Melrose reach its affordable housing goals without eliminating small business areas or building large condo complexes or reducing open spaces in order to do so. We could also work with the Melrose Housing Authority and the state to explore the idea of creating additional senior affordable housing building in Melrose. Our existing buildings are still experiencing very long wait lists, could be up to 2 years just to get in Melrose and in our region. Baby boom, the baby boom generation is aging and needs housing. This is another way in which the city could add more affordable housing units to its housing stock. As mayor, I will think of finding creative ways that we can address our challenges without raising taxes being the only answer. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you. The city's housing production plan identifies passage of the CPA as a priority, and I was one of 7 councilors to support the passage of that as required under state law. I think the CPA is an important tool for Melrose to help achieve many goals, including access to affordable housing and enhancing our open space and preserving historic buildings. We've seen CPA work in surrounding communities, and it's a recommendation of the Massachusetts Area Planning Committee for communities to address housing shortages. As mayor, I will ensure that we are working toward these priorities and continue to build on my demonstrated commitment to housing production.
Thank you. Ms. Hammer?
Great, thank you. So I do think we should consider passing the Community Preservation Act for affordable housing funding sooner than later. But first, I think to Monica's point, we do need to make sure that people feel comfortable in reinvesting in this community. So we need to rebuild a lot of trust with folks before we ask for further investment. But I do believe we need to pass this Community Preservation Act. I also believe we need an absolutely new approach to how we do affordable housing here. We can no longer just rely on developers providing us with 15% of their actually unaffordable units. And we can't wait for housing opportunities to come up for our own corporation to be purchasing. So with a new focus on home ownership to empower residents to build equity, our new affordable housing strategy will give Melrose the opportunity to build homes where we want, in ways that people want, and at prices that people can afford. So I want to work with developers to invest again in our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, again, instead of integrating units into their high rent buildings. I want to have the fund work with the Affordable Housing Corporation to build those home ownership opportunities in locations that are near public transportation, specifically above single-story retail buildings in our community, and also offer these homeownership opportunities to be designated for public employees, including educators, or to recruit educators and public employees that we want. So I'm very passionate about looking at affordable housing very differently from how we've been doing it. We cannot continue to do business as usual if we want to expect new outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question. In June 2020, as part of a project called 2 Weeks Toward Change, Mayor Paul Browder ordered all Melrose departments, boards, and commissions to examine their procedures and policies with the goal of improving those that don't promote racial equity. 3 years later, there has been no follow-up on this project with the community, and no sense that meaningful change came about as a result. Would you commit to ongoing assessment and reporting of the impact of city policies and procedures on racial equity? And we will start with Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you. To answer the question, yes, absolutely. I believe that we need to be looking at everything we do at City Hall through an equity lens. And we need to make sure that staff know the expectations that are on them around follow-up, and also have leadership that are providing them with the tools and the capacity to do this work. It takes time to assess, reflect, and communicate, and we need to make sure that we give staff the time to actually do that. I want to be mindful of time, but as I've said before, I think we need to combine good intentions with accountability and follow through, which is something that I've demonstrated in my tenure at the state and also in my tenure on the city council.
Thank you. Ms. Hammer?
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, I do feel very strongly about having an equity agenda that we can continue on. I appreciate the steps that have been made with our DEI task force and the assessment and reports that they've issued, and also the 2 weeks towards change and the reports that they've issued. It's time to do the work. So I want to partner with the community right away and rebuild an equity task force of department heads, community members, including the youth and experts who already live in this community, and look at the previous survey results and actually come forward and do some of the essential work that we are behind on. It would be driven by data. We will be working with partners in this field, and very importantly, have ongoing communications. I want these meetings to be open to the public, so the public can not only appreciate the work that's being done, but also can participate and learn as we're going. By promoting open and inclusive dialogue, that's how cities can rebuild trust and foster understanding of the challenges faced by marginalized communities, and then issue these milestones as we're moving forward through the agenda. It's critical that we actually start to show the work that we're doing, because we've taken some really good steps forward. We've said the words, we've talked about this quite a bit. It's time we start putting policy to paper and get this work done. But thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Madero Solano?
Thank you. Well, my answer is also yes. And, I am under the understanding that I know an RFP was issued that was due in February of 2023 to evaluate the city government on these parameters and to do DEI training. It's definitely something that I will follow up on. And as this process moves forward, I'm definitely dedicated to reviewing these results with staff to implement the recommended changes. But I think this is part of a greater problem. We've had a lot of times in city government where we take on something, we make a report, we have a group of people that come together. We sometimes really have a very open and inclusive process, and then we create a report and don't do anything with it. And it creates a lot of frustration. Now, clearly, the city may be doing something here, but clearly the people who put together and asked this question don't think the city's doing anything. So there's certainly a problem here that needs to be addressed, and it's part of a greater problem. And we need to make people feel welcomed and included, and that they have a sense of belonging in our community. And this is all people, and it's really something that I'm committed to doing as the next mayor, to creating an environment that's open, that involves stakeholders in the decision-making processes that affect them, and that keeps them involved in the process. Certainly, we need to make sure that we're working regularly with our DEI task force, and that we're being very involved, and we have to be a lot more outreaching. Obviously, I don't think we have been. Otherwise, I don't think we would have gotten this question. So it's something I'm committed to doing a much better job of being much more open, transparent, and creating an atmosphere of greater community engagement. And really, I think we have to go out and go to areas that we're not normally in necessarily as some of as leaders that we've been, and make sure that we are bringing people in and talking and, asking who else can I meet to bring into this process. And I also just want to go one step further. When we're talking about inclusion and bringing people into government, it's really important that we don't just think the only place for people of color is on a DEI task force. We need to see people of color in all of our boards and commissions, in all our positions in city government. And that's something that, again, that I'm committed to working towards it as the next mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question. In 2020, the Melrose Police Department committed to begin the hard and uncomfortable work of confronting their implicit biases and institutional biases. Since that time, the percentage of arrests involving Black individuals has increased. There's also been an increase in the percent of arrests in which race is marked as unknown, a practice which could be masking even greater racial inequities in arrest. As mayor, what steps would you take to ensure that Melrose is not engaging in policing practices that perpetuate systemic racism? First, Ms. Hammer.
Great, thank you. Well, I went back to the 2 week search change, and on page 41 found that our police department should be issuing annual reports and also reports on daily calls. In the city of Boston, we took a very bold step with our police department as a partner in making their data live so that we could see what was going on in our community in very safe ways, but also in ways that were very honest. So what are we even talking about here? We don't even know, without the data, we don't know which overrepresented groups are being impacted. But we finally need to determine where our system is problematic, but we have to do that together. And so I've put public health and safety together in thinking around how we do this equity work. We need to enhance crisis training and intervention for our first responders, increase access to mental health services to address underlying issues in the community. I would like to have them collaborate weekly on community cases that need preventative support. And I refer everyone to the Chelsea Hub model, where 25 agencies meet on a Thursday to work together to address situations for an integrated, proactive approach to actually help people. And then again, back to data transparency, ensure transparency in law enforcement activities and data sharing to foster, again, public trust, and to create intentional connections between our police department and our communities of color and our students specifically. When I was on the Lincoln PTO, I worked with our new police chief to be mindful of ways to build a connection between our Lincoln community and families and our police department. And we had a great response from the police chief, and we'll see how the work continues next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Madeira Solano.
Thank you. So this is an area that is probably one of the ones that is very sensitive. You know, in this country right now, we have a situation where a lot of police feel disrespected and unsupported. And meanwhile, we have a lot of members of the Black community who feel threatened, really at the most basic physical level, to even sometimes go out and drive through their own community. So this is something that we need to work to heal. And I think it's going to take a long time. Some of the things that we can do as mayor is to bring people together. Ms. Hammer mentioned the Chelsea model. It's an excellent model for building community and working across all departments and different community members, and not just for police work, but especially for substance abuse prevention, and really addressing lots of areas of need in our community. This is the kind of thing that we're going to need to go out and do. We're going to need to continue these events like National Night Out that bring people together and increase community policing in ways that are not threatening and that bring people together. But I think it's going to take a long time and a lot of healing. In the meantime, we really have to look at our statistics. And as mayor, I would meet regularly with the chief of police to ask him to personally monitor our arrest practices. And I would also regularly review arrest statistics myself. And we certainly need to implement implicit bias training throughout the city, not just once. This has to be an ongoing process, and we have to review again continually our data and our practices and what's happening, and make sure that we are getting people talking to one another and moving past some of these inherent biases and past some of these feelings of angst and animosity that people have towards one another in the community. It's going to take some time to do this. I'm certainly willing to work together to do this. And also, you know, we have to look very carefully when we implement new laws and regulations in the city, you know, to make sure that they are really reasonable and that they can be enforced, that we have the resources to enforce things on an equitable basis. If we don't, we probably shouldn't enact those laws, because there's probably a better chance than not that due to inherent biases, that an implicit bias, that possibly they may not be enacted equally. So thank you. That tells me that I've gone over time.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you. Between my tenure at the Attorney General's office and at MOVA, I've spent the better part of 2 decades working with enforcement at the state and local level. And obviously this is a a challenge that is throughout policing in this community, in this country. So I just want to acknowledge that I have worked on behalf of the criminal legal system, which is a system that is grounded in historic discrimination. And I think what we need to do is a both and approach. We do need to be analyzing data, and then we also need to listen to the individual stories of those that have been accused of causing harm, of those that were harmed, officers that are responding to the situations in our community on the ground, of our police leadership, of our allied stakeholders in health and human services, and our part regional and state level. And I think we need to be looking to particularly POST, which is the new state agency overseeing peace officers, and to the Mass Police Training Committee to help us really think about best practices in training that we implement in Melrose in partnership with allied stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. And going into our next question. The housing production plan passed by City Council 2 years ago left intact the so-called SR zones on the east side of Melrose, which only permit the construction of single-family residences. The SR zones almost exactly parallel the green districts created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation on their redlined map of Melrose in 1938, marking them as places where Black people would be rejected for home loans. As mayor, would you direct the Office of Planning and Community Development to work to dismantle the SR zones and bring them into conformity with the UR zoning, which predominates in almost every other residential district of Melrose, and thus bring to an end this decades-long policy of housing segregation on the east side? And we will start the answers with Ms. Madero Solano.
Thank you. My answer on this is no. Single unit residences are one of the things that make Melrose a great community to live in, and that zoning needs to be preserved. The independence and freedom of owning a single unit residence are also some of the top things that all homeowners, regardless of color, desire and find empowering. Additionally, many of those single unit residences are ranches, which offer one floor living and are vitally important for an aging population who wishes to age in place. Zoning changes are not the only way to root out redlining or housing segregation, both of which are morally wrong and illegal. The single largest impediment to Black home ownership in Melrose is affordability, and all of Melrose, not just the east side, has pricing that's statistically well beyond the reach of most Black homeowners because of their lack of assets, net worth, and generational wealth, as reported by the Boston Globe. To address these issues effectively, and as I previously discussed, we need to explore ways to create more affordable housing units in Melrose. And one way to do so is creating affordable deed restriction program in exchange for property tax relief. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Grigoritis?
Thank you. As the question highlights, and as I think so many of us have agreed, zoning impacts who lives in this community. And I've proudly supported zoning changes that have been recommended by the planning board that make Melrose more livable and align our city with who we want to be versus who we were. I think this is something that the planning board would need to look at very carefully, along with a robust community input process and a full understanding of the potential impacts. And I would look forward to engaging in this process as mayor.
Ms. Hammer?
Great, thank you. I do really appreciate this question and the thinking around it, and also back to the previous question around discussing this as a community as it reflects our history. Some communities have created more inclusionary zoning overlays, while others are still clinging to these exclusionary zoning practices. And yes, we should think about more inclusionary zoning that we can use to draw in more diversity. But UR won't necessarily solve the problem. It is a part of the puzzle that we have here, being mindful that there's no public transportation nearby, and also that those homes are not necessarily more valuable than the homes on the west side. But we need to push our current zoning to do more for us. In both SR and UR, we can allow for accessory dwelling units, which will have some great relief for multi-generational families, as well as allow for affordable housing in certain areas of parts of lots that are that make sense. Zoning doesn't build housing. We need to commit to do that work, and then we just need to do it. For another forum, I would love to talk about the SRA and that zoning area where we want to maintain some green space, but think about how we can include the community more to make it more accessible and useful for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you. And our next question: what active steps will you take to promote racial diversity, inclusion, and cultural sensitivity in your administration, city offices, and services? It's a really good question. And we're going to start with Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you. It is a good question. So just as I've expressed before earlier tonight, my priorities would include the development of a citywide DEI action plan that would include engagement from residents and allied stakeholders, an equity audit and comprehensive review of city policies and procedures, including hiring, procurement, access to government proceedings, and the make of our boards and commissions, an implementation of a goal-setting process specifically related to DEI for department heads at the individual and department level, and working in partnership with residents of color to develop safe and trauma-informed means for communication on their experiences with city departments so that we can address individual concerns and broad challenges in a way that minimizes challenges and positively affects change. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Hammer.
Great. I want to make, as mayor, I want to make Melrose a place where people want to work, where they feel comfortable, heard, and valued. And it all starts with who works there and who we bring in. It starts with recruiting and hiring practices. This quote, the city has an affirmative action plan on file with the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination for recruiting minority and women applicants. I wasn't able to find this plan on the internet, so I want to review this plan and modernize it as it probably needs, and insist on outreach to diverse candidate no matter how long it takes. Last year, the Human Resources Division at the Commonwealth had made implicit bias training mandatory for all executive branch staff. That's 40,000 people. I want to make implicit bias and bystander training required throughout Melrose departments, and also open up this training to the public, because we all have to be a part of this work. For the past 3 years of the Commonwealth, I've essentially been acting as on the executive team and creating our organization's annual strategic plan, which has always included a focus on people and culture. I serve as our department's DEI content creator, working with my CIO on sharing intentional monthly messages through staff-wide emails that are further discussed at our monthly all-staff meetings. We've been doing this for years, and it has become a part of who we are. I want this continuous learning and curiosity to be part of who we are in Melrose. So not all policies that address racial disparities head on, but a collective effort to create a truly inclusive community where every individual's dignity is honored, where opportunity flourishes unencumbered by prejudice, and where the tapestry of our unique identities can weave together and create a stronger, united community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Madeira Solano.
Thank you. Well, I've said before, I think communication is so important, and it will be one of my highest priorities, as will be fostering a customer service mindset and enforcing the message that all people should be treated with respect. I'll reinforce these tenets as mayor, and as mentioned earlier, I'm going to work to remove inherent biases from our hiring process, to outreach through job postings in our communities of color, and recruiting candidates into municipal government from communities of color. I want to work, and I will work, to make our city government more open, welcoming, and to increase the sense of belonging among our employees. Thank you.
Thank you. For our next question, As mayor, how will you support our educators' commitment to teaching true and accurate U.S. history regarding slavery, the civil rights movement, Jim Crow, redlining, etc.? If and when parents or political organizations pressure or attack individual educators for accurately teaching the history of our country with regard to race relations. First, we'll hear from Ms. Hammer.
Thank you. This was one of the questions I couldn't wait to answer with you all today. Because as a parent at the Lincoln School, we're extremely mindful of both making sure that our students were receiving accurate history, and also making sure that our parents knew it as well. So deliberate curriculum design with diverse perspectives, experiences, and cultures, ensuring every student's needs are addressed and empowering them to succeed regardless of their background or identity is essential in equity in education. And by intentionally integrating inclusive content and promoting critical thinking, we can foster an environment where all learners can thrive. We want all students to feel safe, seen, heard, and that they belong. With that said, pressure from political organizations. As mayor, I'm committed to our educators and ensuring their safety and freedom in delivering comprehensive and inclusive curriculum, including racial justice curriculum. I will firmly oppose any political interference that seeks to hinder the vital progress towards a more equitable and socially conscious learning environment. Come talk to me is what will happen. For our caregivers are our partners in education, and I firmly believe that historically accurate lessons are necessary and would be welcomed in the community. If a hard conversation is needed to work through, let's do it early and often. And again, working with our historical commission on bringing forward some of our true historic lessons from our own community is vital in that work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Madeira Solano.
Thank you. Well, I believe we should encourage parents to be actively involved in their children's education, but we also must support our teachers, and we must create an environment which is free from discrimination. I wholeheartedly support teaching true and accurate history. We need to acknowledge our past, both good and bad, in order for us to move forward, and I'm committed to supporting that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Grigoritis.
Thank you. At this moment in time in 2023, one of my greatest fears as a parent, as a public servant, and as a current elected official is attempts to ban books and/or restrict or question the materials that are being used in our public schools. This is dangerous and unacceptable. And as a leader, I will be bold and unapologetic in defending our educators' ability to teach all of history and to encompass the lived experience of all Americans. I also want to continue to press at the state and at the municipal level for us to work to ensure student privacy, which is something that we know is under attack as we move to increasing digital means of communication between our students and educators, and to make sure that what they are learning, how they are processing that information, and what they are choosing to share about their identities with their educators is not fit for public consumption. So that is something that I take very seriously, both as somebody in the public eye with children in the public schools, and as somebody who believes that we need to be teaching the history of all of America to our students. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad we got to that question, because that was one of the questions that I really want to get answered. We're coming to the end of the forum, so I want to thank everybody for attending. The recording of this event will be posted at www.melroseRacialJusticeForums.org. Please register for our upcoming racial justice forums. The City Council Forum will be held on September 20th. The School Committee Forum will be held on October 4th. As a reminder, do not forget to vote in the preliminary mayoral election, which will be held on Tuesday, September 19th, 2022. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'd shake your hands if we were live. Yeah,
Fair enough.